Hi, I'm Rick Anthony, and welcome to the Someone You Should Know podcast, the podcast that focuses on musicians, authors, and interesting people. We like to say we're making a difference one artist at a time. So sit back, have a cold one, and get ready to meet someone you should know. Hi, I'm Rick Anthony. Welcome to the podcast. And one subgenre of music that's managed to have several revivals was first heard in the late 1930s. It's DooWop music. Do you remember DooWop? Yeah, it's still around. Today's band has been around for nearly 70 years. They were formed in the Bronx in 1956, and they are still doing it today. The band is the Rob Roys, and I'm so honored to have their lead singer with me today. Will you please welcome Norman Fox? Norman, welcome.
It's great to be with you, Rick.
So glad to do this because the 50s music, I still love it today. Of course, I had a big resurgence with Happy Days and American Graffiti back in the 70s and such, but it's still a genre of music that I still truly love. And it seems to be always like almost a happy. Even the blues songs during that time frame were kind of happy. Let's talk about the formation of the Rob Roys. How did that all come together?
Well, in the old days, I call them the old days. When we were back in the 1950s, we were in high school, and somebody came over to me and they said to me, "There's a great new radio show in New York, and you should listen to it. And I think that you'll like it. It's a different kind of music." And so I listened to Alan Freed. And he came in from Cleveland, and Alan brought in his whole genre of music. It was the original rock and roll. You know, Alan coined the phrase rock and roll music.
Absolutely.
So this was the original rock and roll music. Today we call it doo-wop because there are so many different areas of rock and roll music, but this was the original rock and roll music. And I listened to it, and I was just fascinated by the music, by the show, by the whole mood of what that music brought me after all of those years that I was listening to pop music. And so what we did was we wanted to emulate those wonderful groups that we heard on Alan Freed's show, like the Cleftones, the Harp Tones, the Cadillacs, Earl Lewis, and the Channels. I mean, those were the people that were great. And then on top of it, Alan Freed had his rock and roll shows, which he produced at the Brooklyn Paramount Theater and the Brooklyn Fox and the Academy of Music downtown in Manhattan. And we saw all of those groups, and we wanted to be like them. But all of those groups were black groups, and we were white guys. But we wanted to emulate the sound. And so we in our school, we interviewed different singers who could give us that sound. And a couple of those singers happened to be black. And we came up with a sound that was uniquely ours, but nevertheless within the structure of what that music was at that time. And that's how we started.
Wonderful.
In high school.
Wonderful, yeah. And you were one of the very first bands that was a interracial quintet. You had some challenges back in those days because it still wasn't accepted. Civil rights still was starting. What was it like playing the clubs like up in Harlem back at that time frame?
Actually, in Harlem, it was wonderful, and we had marvelous acceptance. We played at the different clubs and the different ballrooms, and it was great. People used to talk to me and wave to me in the streets, and it was just great. The difficult part was when we got out into the countryside and into different states where we wanted to get into a hotel that we couldn't get in when we traveled close to the South, and that became very uncomfortable. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It was the first time that I had ever had that feeling, and it was such an uncomfortable feeling that I remember it. I remember it like it was yesterday.
I can imagine. We've come a long way, haven't we?
We certainly have. Absolutely.
Let's talk about the members of the Rob Roys then, as far as when you first formed in the Bronx back in the 50s. Who were your original five?
Well, the original 5 were from my neighborhood in the Bronx, which was the Riverdale section. The original 3, which was myself, the bass was Buzzy Helfand, and the baritone was Bob Thera. So we were the original 3 guys who formed the group. In our high school, we recruited 2 guys that were black, and one of them was Andre Lilly, who was the second tenor, and we had a first tenor, which was Bob Trotman, and he was our first tenor with the really high voice.
Wonderful. And the style of music, it's so wonderful because you've got the harmonies. You've got, in your case, 5-part harmony. 4-part harmony is fascinating, but 5-part harmony is even better because you've got that depth. And it's not necessary to have the accompaniment. I mean, you could just go ahead and sing a cappella, and it's just amazing how it all comes together. I'm sure sometimes when you sing, you heard song or played songs or sung songs that caused chill bumps just hearing them.
Absolutely. It's just fantastic. The music was so unique and so beautiful. And yes, we started off singing a cappella, and we started off singing in the streets, in the street corner, under the street lights, and at different places in the Bronx for our friends and people who came by. And that's basically how it started. And the 4- and 5-part harmonies that we did were breathtaking because, when you sing by yourself, you're okay. You've got a level of structure that you can hear. People sing in the shower. Everybody sings. But when you put another voice to it, and then a third voice on top of it, and then you build up the 5-part harmony, you're so thrilled by the sound that you get out of that it's something that's extremely unique and that I'll never forget.
Compare that to the music of today when you've got auto-tune and everything like that. It's quite different. It was original music. It was clean music. It was happy music for the most part. And it was just a time frame that I look back lovingly. I mean, I'm 64. I was on the outskirts of it a little bit, but I still enjoyed the music. Now we're going to feature one of those songs. Let's go ahead and feature Tell Me Why. This song brought the group quite a bit of success. Can you tell us about when this was originally released and the challenges you might have faced either recording it or from your record company, Backbeat?
We recorded this in 1957. I'll tell you about how the record contract came about. One of the black guys in the group, Bob Trotman, had a friend who knew of a record store on 3rd Avenue and 145th Street in the Bronx. And we wanted to make a record. Everybody wanted to make a record. Mm-hmm. And we went down and we interviewed for this guy. The record store was so small that half the group was in the street and the other one was in the store. And we sang for this guy, and he loved it. And he had a connection with the people at Backbeat. There was a representative in New York because Backbeat was out of Houston, Texas. And they had a representative. They brought him up. He heard the group, and he liked it very much. They loved the fact that it was an interracial group. Mm-hmm. And so they signed us, and we went into the studio, and we recorded with a band that was very, very famous among the rock and roll groups of that time. Buddy Lucas and the All-Stars probably recorded with a backup band for many, many of the groups around. Anyway, Buddy was about 350 pounds, and he was a great saxophonist. And we just loved meeting him, and we had a good time in the studio. It was a small studio on 8th Avenue in New York, and that's where we recorded Tell Me Why, and that's how it started.
Well, let's go ahead and feature that song right now. Tell Me Why. Let's back it up to 1957 for this one. The Rob Roys featuring Norman Fox right now on the Someone You Should Know podcast.
Tell me why. Why the stars in the sky, they're the same kind of stars that I see in your eyes. I love you, yes.
still sounds good today. Tell Me Why from 1957. The Rob Roys featuring today's podcast guest, Norman Fox. We've got more great music from Norman in a few minutes, but first I want to say thanks so much for tuning into the Someone You Should Know podcast. You can find us on the web at someoneyoushouldknowpodcast.com. If you go there, you're going to see our recent news, our archive of more than 230 episodes. So if you missed anything along the way, you could play catch up there. And just on a snowy afternoon or something like that, it might be fun to kind of do a little reminiscing on some of the episodes you might have missed. Now, according to Buzzsprout, the service that shares us to all the streaming platforms, I want to say thank you so very much. We're in 2,700 cities and 99 countries around the world, still trying to find that 100th country somewhere this year, so we're hoping for that. And I want to salute some cities that are listening in that are in Norman's neighborhood. We got White Plains listening, and Yonkers and Bensonhurst and Oyster Bay, Long Island, and even your home of the Bronx. So they're all listening in to you today, Norman, right here on the Someone You Should Know podcast, heard wherever quality streaming audio is available. Like I said, we're speaking with Norman Fox of the 50s DooWop band called the Rob Roys. And Norman, this is something I got to ask you about the origins of the name the Rob Roys. Did you take that from the drink? Because in my 64 years, I don't think I've ever had a Rob Roy.
It's so interesting, and the answer is yes, we did take it from the drink. And in the years, we were looking for a name. Our original name was called the Velvetones. Okay. And the record company did not like it because, if you remember, in those days, there was so many tones group, the clef tones, the harp tones, and so many different tones that they said, we have to have something a little bit different. So I searched. I didn't know where to go. And then all of a sudden, I was looking at a magazine, and I saw an advertisement for a Rob Roy. I had never heard of the drink before, but the name itself was so intriguing that I submitted it to the record company, and they loved it, and that's how we became the Rob Roys.
There you go. Thank you for answering that question. I've been kind of wondering about it since I found out we were going to talk. And I was going, well, I promised myself I might have one over the holiday season.
Incidentally, Rick, I'm not crazy about the drink. I gotta tell you.
Well, next thing I want to talk about was a song you guys had called Pizza Pie. And due to some kind of contractual dispute between Backbeat Records and Capitol Records, your next label, tell me about that time frame as far as when Pizza Pie got pulled.
Well, what happened was when we put out Tell Me Why, and it sold a number of records, and we got a lot of publicity and a lot of fame through it, but we never made any money because in those days it was a sign of the times. Most of the artists made a little bit of money, but the record companies were not legitimate, the small record companies, and we did not get our royalties. And I wasn't going to record anymore for a company that didn't pay me. So we got a manager, and he went to Capitol Records. Capitol was crazy about the group, and they wanted to sign us, but we had to be released from Backbeat. So we recorded some more songs in order to get released. And he told us that we were released. There was a confusion there. We actually were never released from that contract. We signed with Capitol Records not knowing that we weren't. And when Capitol put out the record, they put out Pizza Pie and Dream Girl, they got sued by Backbeat, and they had to Capitol had to withdraw the record, and it was only on the market for 11 days.
Jeez. Oh, wonderful things. And now I know why some of these musicians are re-releasing everything and remastering everything is because of the complexity of the contract that they signed that they really maybe didn't pay attention to or something, or just the thrill of being signed. And all of a sudden you realize...
Oh, absolutely.
Realize
we were kids. We didn't know what we were doing.
Absolutely. You've had several times where you've had reformations and revivals. In 1971, the group got together. It was like the first time you guys played together in nearly a decade. What was that like back in the early 70s of reforming or temporarily reforming and playing together?
Well, it was quite an interesting period of time because there was a disc jockey in New York. His name was Gus Gossett, and he was having a big show. This was the first revival show that I can remember, and it was at Hunter College Auditorium, which was on 68th Street between Lexington and Park Avenue in New York. Okay. They had a big auditorium, and he had a number of groups on that show. Really good groups, and we were part of that thing. I didn't want to do it. I was already out of the business, but my fellow compatriot in the group, Bob Thera, convinced me just to do the one show, and I said that I would do it, and so we did. There was an 8 o'clock show and an 11 o'clock show. And during the intermission of between those two shows, I went out to take a look at what was going on outside. The streets were packed with people. You couldn't move. And I was blown away, and I said, this is really something. And I think that was the beginning of these revival shows. And it was such an interesting situation. I remember the Mellow Kings were on that show, the OJs. There were really some terrific groups on that show. And it was a complete sellout, standing room only, and I knew that these revivals were going to be something from that point on. And that's the first time that we did the show, and then we continued to do the shows afterwards.
One thing I really noticed about the 70s was everybody was trying to look for a happier time. You had the war going on in Vietnam. You had civil unrest. You had women's rights coming in. And it was a lot of tension and a lot of this. And I think a lot of people just fell in love with the simplicity of the 50s, including the music. So that's why American Graffiti and Happy Days and the music of the 50s had such a resurgence back in the early 70s, was because people were looking for happiness, and they found happiness in the music. That's one thing. Your thoughts on that?
I agree 100%. I think that it was a happy period of time. The people who love the music and follow the music today, and you know from your experience, it's all over the world. And from my experience, it's all over the world. People are looking for happy music in a very, very difficult period of time. And this is the music. It was about love. It was about romance. It was about fun. It was about just growing up and having a good time. I agree 100%. It's awesome. Absolutely fabulous.
Very good. Very good. Another song that we're going to feature is one you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that was that struggle between your old label and Capitol, a song called Dream Girl. Can you tell us a little bit about that song and how it became a Rob Roy song?
Dream Girl was probably the most requested song that I have, and I have it now. People love the song. And the history of the song is I was coming home from school. I was in the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and I had to take the subway down every day from where I lived. And I was on the train, and I was probably reminiscing or in some mood where I was looking for a girl or somebody had struck me, and I wrote the tune on the subway. And with the train moving side to side and the clicking of the tracks that gave me the rhythm, that's how the song and the rhythm came to be. And I got the word Dream Girl, and I went from there and finished it up. But that's how the song was written, and that's how it happened. And, of course, it was the flip side of Pizza Pie. Capitol put it out. But realistically speaking, had Capitol really stood behind us, that song would have been a tremendous, tremendous hit.
Well, let's feature that song right now. A lot of you might remember, a lot of you might not. So let's go ahead and play that right now. Here's the Rob Royce featuring Norman Fox. This is Dream Girl right now on the Someone You Should Know podcast.
My eyes, 'cause when I do, you're just standing dawn, and you'll be gone until another night. Won't you be my dream girl? Make my life a delight. Now when I go to sleep, I put my head on my pillow and try to drift away. But whenever it seems I'm right on the beam, you're creeping right into my every dream. Oh, dream girl, I know I'm not very smart, but there is one thing I can't conceal. My love is real. You're breaking up my heart. Won't you be my dream girl? I've loved you right from the start.
It's DooWop on the podcast today. That's Dream Girl from the Rob Roys, backing up to the 50s. 57, I believe, Norman. Was that right? About the same time for Dream Girl?
Yes, 57.
57, yeah. It still sounds great. Still sounds great. Now, looking back, what would you say would be maybe your most proudest moment for the Rob Roys?
We were called to do a show at Radio City Music Hall, which I still have my poster from all of those years ago. I think anybody and everybody who was in the business at that time was in that show. There were two shows. There was a Friday night show and a Saturday night show, and they were sold out maybe a half hour after the tickets went on sale. It was a huge, huge production, and we were thrilled to be able to do it. It was the 20th anniversary of CBS FM in New York, and they asked us to do that show, and we did, and we blew them away, and that was probably one of my greatest moments.
Awesome.
In the history of my music.
I thank you for sharing that, Norm. I love knowing that people, when they really and truly have the success, and can really remember those moments and just remember them as if they were there today. Now, here's a converse moment now. You've had the high water mark of playing that particular gig. And this next feature is called Tales from the Road. Those are those infamous road stories where things didn't go quite as planned. You get to a venue and realize it is closed, or you drive to the venue and your vehicle breaks down, or you get ready to plug in and your equipment won't work, or something of that nature. Thinking of kind of your Spinal Tap moment, what would you say would be the Rob Roy's Tales from the Road?
Well, we had a couple of tales from the road, but I remember going to a show, and it was out in Long Island, and one of the Bob Thera who's our baritone, was driving, and he was always late. And we ran into a huge amount of traffic. And before every show, you do a sound check, and you operate with the band so that there are no surprises. Everything is planned. But in this particular case, we were stuck on the Long Island Expressway in immense traffic. I was a nervous wreck, and I hate to be late for anything, but much less a show that we're doing in front of a couple of thousand people. So we got to the show, and we couldn't do the sound check, and we're running around, and the promoter was very upset with us, and that was probably one of my worst moments.
They happen. They certainly happen. And we learned from them. That's the most important thing. You can sit back years later with a glass of wine or a bottle of beer and say, do you remember that particular gig? I can't believe we survived that thing. Now, let's talk about where people can follow the Rob Roys in 2025. You've got a website. It's Norman Fox and the RobRoys.com. What other ways can we follow along? Is that the best way, Norman?
Well, you can follow me on Facebook. You can follow me on YouTube. You can follow me on all of those TikTok and all of those vehicles because we put out a lot of music. I'm still writing a lot of music. I write it sometimes in the genre of the old rock and roll and the old rhythm and blues tempos. And sometimes I write them in a modern tempo. But to me, the creation of writing music is something that is wonderful. It's a great vehicle that I take into my old age, and I am old, and it's a wonderful therapy for me. My fans love it. You can follow me through those vehicles, and also you can contact me on nfoxrobroy@gmail.com.
Awesome.
So either way, I'm always available to any fans want to talk. I'll chat with anybody.
Wonderful. Now, Norman, what I'll do is I'll include those down in the show notes so anyone listening in right now can just go to the show notes, click a button, it'll take them exactly where they want to go. What about plans for 2025? You have any upcoming projects that you're looking forward to this year?
I'm doing two things. I'm writing my memoirs, and we're doing some shows in Europe, and we're doing some shows in the States. And they'll be announced. You can see them on my website to just see if they're in your area.
Wonderful. Highly recommend that because the music is timeless. It might have came out in the 50s, but I'll tell you one thing. Here it is 70 years later. It still sounds wonderful. It's just nice and clean and just takes us back to a happier time. We're speaking with Norman Fox. Norman's been our guest today. Thank you so very much, Norman. We do appreciate you getting with us today and spending some time with us and sharing some great music.
It's my pleasure, Rick. It's always a pleasure to be with you guys. And you're a wonderful host. It's a wonderful show, and it's my honor to be on your show.
Hi, this is Rick Anthony, thanking you again for listening to this episode of Someone You Should Know. Now, if you're an aspiring musician or an established musician that's looking for a little exposure, I invite you to drop us a line at someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. That's someoneyoushouldknowpodcast@gmail.com. Also, I invite you to tell a friend about the Someone You Should Know podcast. I thank you for tuning in this time, and I invite you to check us out next time on the Someone You Should Know podcast, because you never know who's going to show up. Until next time, remember, God loves you, and so do I.